L'arrivée de la 5G, le développement du cloud public, la multiplication des objets connectés et des systèmes cyberphysiques bouleversent l'équation traditionnelle de la cybersécurité. La cybersécurité doit maintenant se démocratiser et atteindre les utilisateurs finaux, les objets et les systèmes grand public. Pour cela, elle doit être intégrée de façon native à tous les équipements et être activée par défaut, ce qui implique d'établir des normes et des standards clairs et partagés. C'est l'objectif du Cyber Resilience Act, annoncé en septembre 2021 par Ursula von der Leyen, qui doit doter l'Europe de normes communes de cybersécurité. Que comprendra ce texte? Comment assurer la cybersécurité tout au long du cycle de vie des équipements? Quel rôle et responsabilités pour les utilisateurs, pour les éditeurs logiciels et fabricants? Où en sont les différents schémas de certification lancés dans le cadre du Cyberacte de 2019? Comment imposer la cybersécurité sans entraver la transformation numérique et l'innovation? À travers ces différentes initiatives, c'est la résilience de nos sociétés à l'ère numérique qui est en jeu.
Bonjour, bonjour.
Good morning, and welcome to the FIC in the Grand Palais of Lille, and welcome for this plenary entitled For Collective Resilience and a Safer Europe. And I have the pleasure to be with you to moderate this plenary session. Thank you for being with us in the room in the Grand Palais of Lille, and thank you as well for being connected through the internet to follow us on YouTube or on the FIC app, and you have simultaneous interpretation that is available with some headsets. You can also react and comment via the hashtag Twitter FIC 2022. And during this plenary session, we'll have our drawer with us, Gilles Papor, who welcomes you as well, and he will comment our debates. Let's welcome Alex Berger, who is a major producer. He produced the Bureau des Légendes, and he's going to tell us this morning about cyber security and the parallel with the world of leisure and cyber security. Let's welcome Alex Berger. Thank you, Adrien. Welcome and good morning in this wonderful world of cyber security. I'm very happy to be here as somebody from the leisure industry, somebody who's not really part of your industry as such. But nevertheless, I'm also busy in the field. We've already been hacked on our device. That's a pity. So welcome to Siberia. As Adrien has said, I'm going to tell you about a few aspects that are related between your world, what's happening, the paradigm shift that's happening in cybersecurity, and what I've been living for 40 years in the field of the media and the deep paradigm shifts that we've known, and you'll see if there are some parallels to make. I'm the son of an IT expert, somebody who was busy with applied mathematics at GE and the NASA. That was my father. My father used to bring me when I was a child in the lab of GE to understand what it was all about, to get used to some languages. And I was excited about the idea of learning a new language and a new industry. Then later on, I was in a faculty in Philadelphia. I had to call my parents every Sunday, which cost a lot. So I learned how to hack the AT&T system to talk with my parents with the landline. And that was a little bit the way I dived into the industry. Today, I'm committed to the INCYBER. My teams and we work a lot there. You'll see more about it later on. I'm very close to the cyber campus. For me, that is the showcase of communication for the future in France. Agora 41, which is a French think tank of the ANSI, with many issues dealt with around the cyber space. And then I'm a colonel of Space Army and Air Army, so that in these worlds, in addition to the media, I can get to learn more about different cultures, universes, languages, and know more about what's happening for the time being. In my life, I've experienced a dramatic paradigm shift. When I started, it was in a TV station, Télé Monte Carlo, who was belonging to Monaco Principality, and we were doing a little bit of what we wanted, but we had no money. So we had to be very creative, so that we hacked an Atari device to create an online game with phones. On the bottom you had numbers and so on. And that really showed me that everything was possible in a world that we could create in our space, and that we could invent it all. Then I left for the US, where I understood the power of the brand. I worked there for a company that was busy with the production of toys, among others. And 24 months later, there was a line of robot toys that had to be launched. The company was to spend a lot of money in advertising. So I told them, instead of spending so much money, maybe you can give me half of it, and we'll have some animations to explain that Robotech range that we sold all over the world. Instead of sending $4 million or spending $4 million, they saved 80. So that was really the power of storytelling in all fields, and especially with toys, to sell them to an audience and children. And in France, the turn to private TV taught me that you can also sell rock and roll to the US. And in many fields it was the case. So that creativity, the power of knowing who you address to, the power of knowing that languages, audiences, populations are extremely different from one place to another, and that you need to adapt to their own language. And then the UK, where with Richard Branson we could start tens of programs. And we brought a different perspective, or pace, or style. I was young at the time. I did not see what I wanted to see on TV, and that's what we invented. And that's what we wanted to experience, especially in the UK, with some success, with an Antoine de Gaulle who was speaking English with a French accent, and all that on the BBC in premium time. Everything was possible, but there was also the possibility of being ubiquitous. We could be French and start going elsewhere, because the cultural language that we were telling had an echo to the Italian, the German, the British, and in the 16 countries where we sold our products. Then the technological mutation. The thematic channels, the cable channels arrived in France. We didn't have much money once again, so that we had to pull together technology to be able to do things at an affordable price. Then another change at Canal+, where I was in charge of the group strategy. And then Vivendi Net, the media channel, where we were learning in a world of 128K how we could migrate some content from an interactive TV channel through a phone and through the web. It sounds basic and ridiculous now, but at that time, it was a seamless world, and it was totally new. So we had to talk differently. We had to recruit different people. And that's also something that I learned. The more the mutations were there and the paradigm shifts, the more new people you need. When I started with TV, that was the time of Gilux. If you are abroad, just let me tell you that he was one of the pillars of old TV. When I joined the industry when I was 21, we needed to go and find different competencies, and it was very complicated. It was complicated to break the glass ceiling and as Canal Plus to state that we had to do things differently, show the difference and attract more people and more talents. Then I could understand what storytelling was all about, having films with Alain Chabat. We were co-producers of Mission Cleopatra with Asterix, and the idea of the parallel processes in TV. That means having plenty of different brains all together. Move forward, progress, do better. And faster with people working in a team all together. And that was a major change. It was already the case in other countries, but it was very important in France. Berger quiz 22 years ago, there were many authors around the table who were due to find jokes all along the day, a major change. MMI, who was there with Enjoy, and then there came the time of the change, where the production oligarchs, my company, we had an ambition. It was to change the industrial process and the way we could tell about fiction. We had discovered what was happening in Israel, in Scandinavia, in the UK, in the US, and we thought, why not us? That was in 2010. We had to adapt what we wanted to do to a totally different world. And this is what you are experiencing now in cyber and cybersecurity, a massive and fast development of that world. Ubiquity, because we are all connected, and the perception for different people, for different audiences. And that's an additional complexity. You are a media, you are a world, and you need to understand that the engineer who did 7 years higher studies is an extraordinary talent, but there are others, useful, important, and necessary people. And to explain that, what was uncommon and expensive was bandwidth. When I joined, the state controlled that bandwidth, controlled dissemination. And then Canal was there, and there was programming on Clear, and they used the channel, the network of the state. But then it was 100 times less expensive to have a channel with the satellites, so more people, more talents could join in a world that was extremely complicated. And then we arrived, that was in 2008, we started working, and we thought, the world is changing. Why that? Because there are new offers that are less linear. And also, these new people are coming in our market with an extraordinary specificity. You pay for the bandwidth. The network, that's you. It's extraordinary. So we're going to focus on the customer interface, the algorithms, and then the rest will be paid by the audience. So a deep paradigm shift. We needed to invent, and there was something that was disseminated in 2015, in a world that had started to change dramatically, because we could quietly, with our smartphone, with our iPhone, with our mobile, in the comfort of your living room, you could disseminate a program. It changes it all, and the way of telling the story changes it all as well. The French situation was pretty cool. There were many players. Everybody was getting organized. We knew in the big groups how things were happening. And then somebody came and said, I'm not playing your rules. I'm not going to sign any agreement. And the American, you know, are the strongest to invent a process and establish the rules straight ahead. And in France and in Europe, people kept saying, I won't sign a deal with the state, I won't be regulated, until there is a critical mass. And when I'll have a critical mass, I can start debating. That's our current world. That's a dramatic change. And what does it mean? It means we don't write the stories the same way, and films are no longer the same either. Netflix announced 52 new films per year in the US, 52 international films on the platform. It's not the same experience. We are not in one room as here, and not in one room listening to an old guy as I am. Really, the experience changes, and the way to write changes. The audience, the way people receive a message also changes. So that's really significant to understand the change that took place on TV. Because the critical mass of newcomers, their means, determine the standards. That was the case on TV. Maybe there will be new things in your industry as well. It's an aspect of sovereignty for TV. We need to regulate things in a way because we don't have the same budgets. And at the same time, there is the content, the control of the assets, where are the servers, what's happening, and do we have enough money in a country, in a system, or does the money leave elsewhere? Do we transfer rights? Do we transfer licenses as well? Same thing for the GAFAs. We were a critical mass. I was always amazed by the ICAM. I have to buy that from a private company, an American one, but it's not only that. Google, you have a standardized advertising space, and you have to adapt to it. So there is a whole reflection. We're not less intelligent than others, on the contrary, but we have an ecosystem which is economic, legal, of regulation, and public, which is complex. And we wait a little bit for the market to be there, and we bear with it. And it's a real problem. Bear with it or not, that's the question. So there are disruptions, because the people who came to France have come on the margin. Amazon used to sell something else at the beginning. Tens of billions of turnover are there for selling products. Apple sells hardware, and Disney had many other vertical ranges. And when they arrived, it's just like others. They come not playing with the same terms, the same rules, and not exactly in the same verticality of a system or a market. And I have the feeling that it's also what's happening, and I'm talking here about sovereignty, when we have a look at cyber security with markets dominating players. There is some complexity. If some companies don't come from the Western world or Europe, but from elsewhere, and that's also where we discover the limits and the importance of that outpower. Let me come back to what I know best, the Bureau des Légendes. If you don't know it, it's a series about French intelligence, and it's a love story that's happening within the DGSE, and we explain, we show what realistically is the life of French intelligence or the geopolitics of France based on the service. Let's have a few pictures for you to understand if you don't know what it is.
-5.
Ça, c'est N. Ça, c'est N-1, N-2, N-3, N-4. La DGSE, c'est N-10. On arrête tout s'ils arrivent à N-5.
C'est parti. Oh putain. prends le relais. Waouh. C'est pas des Ukrainiens. Hein. Ils sont forts, les salauds.
Honestly, this was for us a deep dive into the cyber universe. So we learned a lot. It was very complicated to do something realistic, and even more complicated and very boring to film computer screens. So it's always a story of people, and these people need to carry things and present a point of view, particularly this cyber attack that we had to film. We needed to find a way to present the cyber universe, to understand what the complexity and the tension of this industry is, and to put it in front of a less informed audience that would follow the story. That was very important. So what we are doing today, what we were doing then, you have an idea, you need to find the product, and the system around which we film an industrial process. As far as we are concerned, we had 10 episodes per year. This did not exist in France, so we needed to find an industrial production method that we had to invent by trying to get the best talents to do this and make it pedagogically, and also create a brand, an emotional engagement brand where people come back for 50 hours, 5 years, 50 episodes, and that is very complex. It's very fragile, very complicated. That was Le Bureau des Légendes, the TV series. You went to see the French intelligence community to try to get them to pick their brains. You had to be very creative because normally they're not supposed to talk. And we were kind of saying why we French could not do a TV series with in a genre, in an industry that's very strongly dominated by the English-speaking market, a yearly recurrence, 10 episodes per year. No one had done it, BBC. 7 years, and this brand that we had to manage, the fragility of the brand, that was very important. Our system was simple, one idea, a concept in which we film, a new environment which we introduce the audience to, and people, actors that built this universe, and they are the ones basically holding up and holding the entire concept together. That's our magical formula, magical recipe. When we needed to talk about the experts in the field, we called them the ministry, and they put us in contact with people from the DGSE. Said you don't want to talk to us, we have no way to verify, so we're going to do a protocol in exchange of your logo, so realistic. You tell us if it's plausible or not. If it's not plausible, we have creative heads, 10 copywriters who are going to reinvent things for it to become plausible. And of course, some things that were inherent to our agreement with the DGSE, with the French security industry. It worked. We are the French champions in terms of exporting a TV. We have about 120 countries that have bought the series, and many, many more people outside of France who look at Le Bureau des Légendes, especially in the US or in Russia or in Taiwan. This has completely gone over our head, but it's fantastic to be able to say that we were in a source code that culturally spoke to people. And that is important. We explained to an environment that was completely fantasized once. Okay, this is what you fantasize, but this is what the real life looks like. And it was a critical success, a fantastic commercial success. And for the French intelligence industry, it's 400% qualified recruitment. That's a huge young people with, so say, I'm interested by working. Now I understand better how you work. I think I could contribute something to this in this area. And that was extremely important. It wasn't our role. Our role, we just wanted to make good TV and in a specific genre, which was a spy movie, and telling it differently from a French point of view. But it's true that the French intelligence services have benefited hugely from it, not just the DGSE, but we made lots of friends, all the intelligence services around us. We have big fans. And that is quite interesting to have friends in high places in these areas in the intelligence industry. And of course, and what we were doing, the government was interested, and we worked with Monsieur Le Briand, who was back the defense minister, to make this idea of national defense and the citizenship more clear. We need to the defense needs to be put in the hands of authors, of copywriters, so that the public can understand what it means working for the national defense. It can amplify. We can talk about the reality, and both sides can benefit from it. As he said, there is no soft power, there's only hard power, and we were able to implement a system that works extremely well between the Defense Ministry and the producers, the clowns and artists that we are. In the US, the Ministry of Defense has been doing this for the past 100 years. It's nothing new. They are the first collaborator with Hollywood, being in terms of means and technology, also in terms of messaging or moral orientation or policy orientation. So this is a system that's extremely well worked. In the US, they do it very well. We invent a domain, we create the process, we create the norms, the standards, and we sell it well. The last mile, where in France we're not necessarily good in selling. We're really good in all other fields. But once we've baked the cake, we said, okay, they'll come, it's going to sell itself. No, that's the problem we have in France. That was the case in the media, and we had to change that. Since we changed this, particularly for the Bureau de Légende, the digital marketing and communication promotion, that was complex. The first time that a French series was going to be present in 120 countries, so we needed to manage this brand and the way we would present this product in an extremely different way, and at the same time we were talking about the same thing, very complicated. So it's a plan that is just as important as the script. And actually the PMDC plan strategy is thought out, it's designed at the same time as you design the script. How does this apply to you, to your cybersecurity world? How does this link up with the cybersecurity world? This world is incredible. And among us, we are here at the heart of this. Everyone is not just concerned, but needs to have the responsibility of knowing. And this, in the world in which we are today, in this entire connectivity, this absolute connectivity, the audience needs to be more aware of the challenges of which you are the gatekeepers today and the actors. Widening the scopes understand that you need to have a digital hygiene, a cybersecurity hygiene. This is fundamental. It's not just to fix. We need to predict. People need to be aware. They need to prepare, not fix.
Le dernier signal a été envoyé ici, dans un poste de la ville de Hama.
Juliette, c'est pour vous.
Allô?
Coucou ma chérie, c'est tonton.
Écoute, je suis désolé de t'appeler à ton travail là, mais...
J'ai un fichier qui a disparu là sur l'ordinateur de ma boîte.
Bah je sais pas, moi tu l'avais sauvegardé?
Oui, enfin je pense.
Tu crois que ça peut être un virus ou une attaque?
Je sais pas tonton, si t'as un problème, tu vas sur le site de l'ANSSI. Je te laisse là, j'ai du boulot, d'accord? Bisous.
Tout va bien Juliette?
Oui, pardon. Je disais, le fichier, le téléphone de Malotru n'aimait plus. Va falloir être patient.
Face à la menace cyber,
Pas besoin de connaître quelqu'un au bureau des légendes. Adoptons les bons réflexes.
It was important to be able to put at the service of the cause of the cyber cause through the ANSI a brand that already had an emotional commitment. A brand like the Bureau des Légendes, how are they used? By doing small messages like this that are usually very effective, very present in the world in which we are. So this emotional commitment, these are brands which we create. We are brands, the situations which we are, these are brands. This commitment of the cyber and cybersecurity, that's what it is. And the Americans do this because not just the Americans, but they're really good at it. But there's other sectors in the luxury industry, in the music industry, of course, the leisure industry, TV, movies, all these are brands that commit, engage. I'm willing to devote time to it. I want to feel something by devoting time to this. And it's the same that's going to happen in other brands, especially in the cyber industry. So when we created this brand, in short time, how does emotional engagement fundamental becomes something important for everyone? So this is how we amplify, how we try to broadcast this feeling. We're going to create brands, values, understand the complexity of all the environments. That's what we're trying to do internally and externally. The way we're going to amplify this is fragile. We need to think this from the beginning, the last mile. How are we going to promote these? So, of course, this needs skills. It's a tone of voice, it's values, it's diversity. We're going to focus more young women because they're a big minority, not just techies or geeks, which we're going to take out of the same place because everyone is trying to fish in the same pond. We're going to have to look elsewhere differently. This is what we did with TV. Canal Plus, that's what it was in 1984. We went to get other talents, people from other fields, other points of view, in order to teach them a new way of doing. And this is important, not just with people who are in this area, but also economical stakeholders, institutional stakeholders, etc. And we have a system that is very simple, that is remark. With very simple systems, we do this in TV, and it's the same with you. It's the same in your area. And this is important to think about this from the beginning in your area in order to amplify this. And so in France, the entry-level brand will be the Cyber Campus, where everyone, at least in France, will be able to find a shop window and where the audience is going to come and start getting informed daily of what is going on and of the thousands of attacks happening in real time. It's scary, but you need to know about this. You can't just put your head in the sand. Well, just as we've seen it during the pandemic, they're going to maintain a background noise on the importance of cyber, of having toolboxes and concrete things to show to the audience. And then, of course, this chamber of resonance will be important. The sounding chamber will be important. We are all here in a healthy competition. It's a co-competition, cooperation and competition. But you need to think about the simple way of communicating together the cyber campus that will be our point of entry, I'm sure, in France. And this background noise can be done also differently. And this differently, that's my role, my trade. I'm a producer. I produce brands. I build brands. And I'm announcing you here solemnly here in Lille today that we're going to create a new brand that's called Siberia. This is a series which we're developing actually with some French copywriters and from other countries. And here again, we need you. We need your stories. We need to be fed on the opportunities, on the extent of everything this means, on the culture, in order to explain to the wider audience the situation, tense and complex situation of the cyber universe and of cybersecurity in our country. This is important. We are building it at the moment. This is a call. I'm calling to you, I'm calling up to your experience. We're already talking with many people. What we want to do is to speak everywhere with qualified people so that we can really tell a story, a narrative, and insert it in a realistic presentation and get a maximum of people to understand this digital hygiene that you need to have. I think I've reached the end of my allotted time. I hope it was interesting for you. In any case, thank you for the time you've devoted to me. Thank you, Alex. I think if you haven't watched the Bureau des légendes yet, now you're probably heavily motivated, and we're all waiting for the continuation of the series. Let's start our panel. I'm going to invite our panelists to please come on stage so we can start the round table. Sit down, take a seat, and be welcome. It's a great honor and pleasure to have to my right Lorraine Labonzo. You are in charge of cyber security at the DG Connect at the Commission of Peace. To your right, Roland Atoui, who is the founder of Red Alert Labs and who is the member of the Board of Administration of the Digital Trust, and André Ozonis, who is in charge of a unit at l'ENISA, the European Agency for Cybersecurity. Welcome to all of you. So digital transformation touches all areas of activity, even health, any types of targets, even health that was spared, but now it's been suffering attacks for the past 2 years. With the Cyber Resilience Act, CRA, the chair of the president of the European Commission has announced on the 15th September a launch of a new standards for cybersecurity, establishing common standards for cybersecurity of products in the framework of a new European cyber resilience law. What is this about? How can this reinforce the cyber resilience of the European Union? Thank you very much. Thank you for having invited the European Commission. I'm going to try to speak in French, but I'm sorry. Sometimes I'll switch to English because in the Commission we work in English. So, yes, no worries. We can all switch. Sorry. So should I make mistakes in French? Why? Why has the President announced this initiative? I think it was absolutely necessary. During the entirety of this conference, we have certainly heard figures on how many cyber attacks have been increasing. I'm not going to add anything to that. There's been many of these. I'm not even going to speak about the causes and the origins. I'm going to focus on how can we carry out so many attacks on our society, and one of the main fields of attack are the vulnerabilities of our connected devices. There are figures. People speak about 62% of attacks that target that would be because of the use of vulnerabilities of connected products. There are far more dramatic figures that speak about 90%. Why are there so many vulnerabilities in our digital products? One of the reasons, and that is why the President von der Leyen has said that we needed to set up this initiative, because usually we react afterwards when there is a market failure. Why don't we invest sufficiently on upstream cybersecurity of our products? And one of the reasons for this is because there's no motivation for that. And why is there no motivation for that? Because most of the costs when there is an attack, these are borne by the users, being the operators of essential services, or the end users, the consumers. They bear most of the cost. These costs are not just cost to fix the attack, but also the cost to mitigate insurances or introduce SOCs in a company. So all these are high costs that most of them are not borne by the producers, by the manufacturers. That's why you always consider that it's necessary to intervene downstream rather than upstream. And these vulnerabilities are constantly increasing, particularly zero-day vulnerabilities are constantly increasing. So apart the fact that there's not sufficient motivation because the costs are borne by the users, we are in markets where we have what we call network effects, where what's very important for the manufacturers is to be the first one to bring the product to market, because the winner takes it all. So we're going to try to throw it on the market before we even know, or sometimes even knowingly, that the product is not yet sufficiently secured. But if we're too late, then we lose the market. So we throw half-baked products on the market. That's why we set up this legislative initiatives with an act. I can explain that to you. So the main ideas of the Cyber Resilience Act is to come a horizontal proposition. Sorry, we'll get back to it, Ms. Box-Alonso. The fact that the urgency to be the first on the market and the fact that the costs linked to these vulnerabilities are not borne by the manufacturers but by the end users. So the idea is to raise the awareness and so Roland from Red Hat Labs, you are a member of the Board of Administrators for the Digital Trust. What are the elements of the Cyber Resilience Acts that attract your attention? What's your opinion on that? Hello, everyone. What Lauren mentioned is very important to be able to really understand why today we have proposed the Cyber Resilience Act. You need to understand even better what it consists in. What does it concern? What is it about? The Cyber Resilience Act is about all the products, physical and software products, hardware and software, that will be connected either via cable or wirelessly. And that includes also the bits of code, the auxiliary or connects afferent software that would be working in a chained or dependent mode of these products. So I'll let you imagine the scope and the variety of this product, of this type of products. It can be connected objects, a connected camera, but can also be your smartphone, and tons of lines of code and software that will be concerned. The key elements of the Cyber Resilience Act up until now, we are not reached the end of the road yet, and we have not taken the final decisions on the granularity of the scope and also of the types of horizontal expectations that will be implemented. What we need to remember today is that we speak about design vulnerabilities. So we need to understand why the manufacturer would play a role, why it needs to share a certain responsibility. So we know that attacks evolve, and that certainly the holes we plug there will be open new holes, and all in these connected products will see an evolution in their vulnerabilities, and new holes are going to appear, new surfaces of attack. So we need to design, from the design stage, we need to avoid the 60% of attacks that target the vulnerabilities in these objects. But here we talk about by security by design. So that means that from the beginning, from the drawing board, we need to implement procedures, means, technical means, governance in the life cycle of the development all the way up to the OT aspect of these products in order to mitigate and minimize the surface of attacks and the number of surface of attacks, and also provide a certain degree of trust to this market. So the keywords will really talk about life cycles, the entire life cycle, and I mean the manufacturer will have a certain degree of responsibility, but indeed this responsibility should be shared, and that is the discussion of where does Cyber Resilience Act stop and what is the scope of its expectations, how is this going to be preserved and maintained all along this life cycle. So we are talking by security by default during the manufacturing. It's also to minimize the responsibility part that the consumer will have to take into account in order to ensure this level of security. We're talking about So we're talking about security by default today, security by design, upstream from the blueprint stage, and we're talking about, of course, vulnerability analysis, management of vulnerabilities over time. These are the keywords that you need to take home with you today if you are concerned, and I'm sure that you're all concerned here, that whether you are a consumer, a buyer of these products, or a manufacturer or a developer. So we really need to follow the evolution of the Cyber Resilience Act. Yes, of course we can, and we also need to take into account that the life cycles are very short, the evolutions are very quick, defining responsibility, where does yours end, where does the other person's end. It requires a real work and a real approach. It's a complex topic, but we're moving forwards. Now, Evangelos Ozunes, what is your...
How does Europe benefit from it, or how is Europe to benefit from it? What's your experience with the Cybersecurity Act?
Yes, so first of all, apologies for speaking in English. My friends are not at the level of
Do not.
this conference.
Do not. This is the international
and I
cybersecurity
bring the international
forum.
aspects of it, so thank you. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. It's a fantastic event. Congratulations to the organizers. And thank you for inviting ENISA. And I hope that this event develops further, into a milestone of the European events on cybersecurity. The CRA is an important development in the EU policy making because it deals with the end devices, not only of the consumers, but also in the industrial setting. It has, at the moment, the Commission knows better, it has a broad scope and deals with connected devices. And we all know that these devices, are becoming more and more important in our way of living. They integrate in our way, they support, new use cases like smart homes, intelligent devices, digital assistants. And we have all experiences of problems with these devices. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. There are problems with the passwords, definitely problems with the encryption. There are issues with the life cycle. So I think it's about time that the policymakers are thinking about this and come up with something, a framework, a policy initiative that will give some order in the jungle of it. And there are a lot of important elements to consider, and we know that they are very important for cybersecurity and the resilience. Some of them have been already proposed, and I think that if we implement them, then the end user, at least the citizen and the customer, will be reassured, that, their privacy is taken properly under consideration. If there are any patches or problems, there is some responsibility, some accountability. And in general, you feel that you have a device that works well. And we have this in other cases, in cars, you buy a car, if something goes wrong, then you know that, there is a framework that will support you. In the digital products, we don't have this. And in my opinion, that will be the big milestone here. Now, I think we have to see the details, how it is implemented, because there are also other policy initiatives, for example, in medical devices, that has to be properly aligned. Also, there is a framework, the CSA, the Cybersecurity Act, that defines some assurance levels, some risks. In my opinion, there should be some alignment there. And of course, not all devices are super risky, and the policy initiative should be proportional to the risk. And, for devices which are not necessarily super risky and do not affect, lives of people, maybe, we propose, let's say, relevant measures. And for others which are very important, maybe we have to be a little bit more draconian, maybe there is a proper supervision, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that the Commission has a lot of experience on these matters. ENISA, as a body, as a technical body, will be here to support the process, provide technical advice, and we are already doing it. And it's going to be our pleasure and to do that. And what I can say to the people who come from the industry is that for people who are, very keen on cybersecurity, don't worry. This initiative is going actually to boost your bottom line. It's going to offer you an opportunity to demonstrate, that you do your job properly, and, might even give you further opportunities, in the market. So that's my, I think, message today.
Je me tourne vers vous. On comprend que, voilà, le cyber.
Okay, we understand that the Cyber Resilience Act adds on to the Cybersecurity Act of 2019, and we understand the urgency because of the increase of attacks, of vulnerabilities. Does this participate, the Cyber Resilience Act, participate in the building of a single digital European market? Does this benefit the European strategic autonomy and sovereignty? Yes, when we're talking about digital autonomy, cybersecurity, it's a fundamental element of this digital sovereignty. You can't be sovereign if you're not cyber secure. Autonomy is one of the cybersecurity is one of the key of this autonomy. And as you said, cyber attacks, they are constantly increasing. As Evangelist said, the connected devices are also growing constantly. And what is very important to be autonomous, to be sovereign, it's to have a single market. And this is something for the companies. It's also very important. Taking into account the situation, we clearly know that, be it the Commission or the member states or third-party countries, we're going to have to act. Because there is a market failure, we're going to have to intervene. It's best if we intervene in a consistent, coherent, organized, and for the common market. The worst for the companies would be a variety of a piecemeal of legislations. So we have sectorial legislations for cars, for medical devices, for connected devices, and slowly, one after, we are going to have more and more. It's better to have a horizontal approach, where a level playing field, where the companies know what to work with, and it's better to have an approach, a singular approach for the European Union. If chaque member states, and we see that they start doing this with different legislations, then the costs will be huge, and it's always better to be the first ones on the market. I'm not sure that we're the first ones actually on the market, but we already see some third-party countries that start to intervene in that field. We are just spoken about software. One of the important aspects of this new legislative proposition. It's not yet been voted. Everyone speaks about it, but it will only be voted in September. I hope we'll be there in time. We want to introduce a software in this legislative field, because we know that in supply chain attacks, this very often happens via the faults and failures in software. We know in the US, because of the numerous attacks on the supply chains, the value chains. In the US, they've already published an executive order specifically to force obligations upon software providers and lines of code when we're talking about contracts with the state authorities or the defense. Of course, this is mainly, there's a certain number of standards. There's already guidelines in the US. Things are getting along in Japan, in the UK, in Singapore. All the third-party countries are already positioning themselves. I think that the best is for us at the EU is to come with our own proposition that will be the common European proposition. And the previous speaker, Mr. Berger, was speaking about the values, about the brands. I think something that is very important for Europe is to position ourselves in the digital world with as a core value, cybersecurity. Our manufacturers, our producers will have this brand, this European label, cybersecure product.
The objective is to encourage certification, to harmonize the level of cybersecurity in the European Union. You are part of the stakeholders that unite everything. How can we proceed to have something accessible to all players, the biggest, the smallest, the most mature, the least mature? Isn't it an obstacle for the smallest? So that's a very interesting question that you're asking. We've talked about certification. And indeed, when we talk about certification, it has to do a bit more with trust than resilience. And that explains that there is another European regulation, the Cyber Act, that dates back to September 2019. And basically, it gives a mandate to the ENISA, which is the European Agency for Cybersecurity, to help the Commission specifically on the definition of certification schemes. So the Cybersecurity Act also defines a frame, some rules to harmonize the certification schemes, the rules of requirements, of methodologies that give a certain level of trust, and that among the 27 member states. That's key. So first, you cannot split the Cyber Resilience Act from the Cyber Security Act. That's impossible. There is a close link there. And the question is, in order to develop these certification schemes and to have all member states at the right level, we need to start talking the same language. The Cybersecurity Act has given a certain level of rules. And that's where we're talking about a definition of standards. So to come back to your question, the main part is to know how to proceed. First, all of these member states, whatever their maturity level, all stakeholders have to be part of the definition of standards. And that's not obvious. And we've seen that since 2019. It's not obvious to tell everybody to speak the same language overnight. So it took some time to put them all up to level. There have been training sessions. There have been initiatives coming from the member states, but also exchanges among member states. And we've been part in several exchanges with the NC and other member states and the agencies that are accredited in order to create an environment that could start creating standards. And that's a key component to be able to state, okay, we now have methodologies, we have security requirements, and they are harmonized among member states. And they allow developers to set up processes, products, services, and be able to certify in one go, in one member state, and to allow the same product to be used all over the European Union. And that's essential, and that's the ambition. Of course, the way ahead is still very long, but it's a first step, because that's a reality. We can see today several member states who knew nothing about these processes that transmit trust, especially on product aspects. Some were much more concerned by information systems, and then for years, because there was the NIS directive and others that was dealing with it. But today we're bringing in products and services in that frame that were unknown to many authorities and member states. There is a lot of activity framed by the ENISA, by groups, with the Commission, that allow either to cooperate together within ad hoc working groups to create the standards, to be part in the European certification agencies like the Sensenelec, and discuss with industrialists, because they should not be forgotten. And that's the key, according to me. Be able to discuss with everyone, involve everyone. That was the aim when creating the process. We expect a lot of transparency, clarity, agility, to go fast, because indeed the threat is not waiting. Indeed, let's not forget about industrialists and competitiveness, which is key. You've said it. There are some legislative initiatives taken in some regions. Things are moving fast. Everybody wonders about that competitiveness. How can we proceed to take into account the competitiveness of industrialists and reassure them so that they can remain competitive, not be crushed down or having to bear with many constraints, and especially for our small and middle-sized companies? How can we keep that ecosystem and allow the small players to become bigger and develop in a frame that is better defined? It's a very good question. First of all, I'm going to say something about competitiveness vis-à-vis companies from third countries, especially for SMEs. In terms of the third country companies, I think there is no difficulty of competitiveness, because the law proposition, once adopted first by the Commission and then by the co-lawmakers, it should apply to any company that is willing to put their products on the European market. I'm not going to mention all third countries, of course, but anybody. Everybody will have to follow the same rules. As I was telling you before, third countries have already started moving. And it's always better to be the first if we can. Then, in terms of costs, it depends a lot on our requests. First, coming with a horizontal proposition, that's already going to save or reduce the administrative costs. The costs of having to be submitted to different laws, be that by industry or by member states. And that's already an objective. And it's going to help the main companies, the big companies, and also the small ones. Then when talking about regulation, because that's no real revolution here, because for years in Europe, we have been putting some obligations or requests on the production of products, so that's nothing really new. The only thing that we are doing is updating the legislation, bringing it to the 21st century, because we have to deal with connected products and aspects of vulnerability and softwares. So that means that we're moving ahead with our laws. So I believe that there are many companies that have already started wondering about the rules for their products. Then the major part of costs will not come from our requirements, but how to demonstrate that the producers are compliant. And there are different possible ways. You have self-assessment. And I'm going to say it in English. The Equipment Directive, we have a delegated act there that already covers, partly, not totally. That's why we have a new law proposition, but it already covers a part of connected products. And it has to do with self-assessment. Of course, the cost is higher if we need to turn to a compliance assessment body. And I think that there should be a risk assessment according to the use of product or the threat of these products for physical safety. There, people need to check if it's necessary to go beyond self-assessment. And in the Commission, we are working on the impact analysis, and we'll have to be careful to be proportionate. That means not to demand to go very far, be that with external bodies or even structures in charge of certification, when it's not necessary. A self-assessment can sometimes be sufficient, that can reduce costs. Then competitiveness is essential, of course, but when we have a look at the cost of cyber attacks, these costs hugely impact competitiveness, and they keep increasing. So one of our final targets should be to reduce the costs that the whole society, including industry, have to bear with due to the cyber attacks. I believe that's also going to help us in terms of competitiveness. Evangelos.
Resilience Act consolidates the role and broadens the mandate of ENISA. How is ENISA going to support, what kind of support is ENISA going to provide the manufacturers, software and hardware manufacturers, for the adoption and the implementation of certifications? What kind of support are you going to provide? We understand that the point is to not have the community support indirect costs and to force producers to take that into account from the beginning, from the start. But they need support. You know, they need to be driven and taken down that path. What kind of support ENISA provides for these producers?
Yes, so first of all, it was a great achievement, the introduction of the certification mandate in ENISA's responsibilities. A big achievement for Europe. For many, many years we were struggling, you know, to have a European approach on this. So we are very glad that this is added. And we are very confident that we are able, you know, to deliver on this. Certification is an aspect of cybersecurity, but it's not a silver bullet. So it solves some problems, but we should not equalize certification with necessarily the only solution to cybersecurity. The third is that the certification approach that we have at the moment is on a voluntary basis, and we still rely on the uptake of the industry and the deployment of it. But we know that ENISA's work, and together with the legal support of the Commission, that will have definitely an important influence. Currently, there are 3 schemes in the making. One is, the legacy of SOG-IS on common criteria, which is fairly advanced. The second scheme that we are preparing is on cloud, that we still fine-tune some important aspects. And the third one is on the 5G, which is an emerging technology, and the Commission and the ENISA and the Member States have done a lot of work in the context of the 5G toolbox. We believe that the certification schemes that we are preparing are going to be the cornerstones for the European single market. It will help manufacturers, vendors, actually to develop products that will be widely used in the European space. And given that Europe is very influential in other continents, in other parts, we hope that European products will be mainstream also in these areas. So it's important to avoid fragmentation and to create some European champions that will have the resources, the financial resources, the technical capabilities, the skills, and also the products, to compete with emerging superpowers like the US and China, that they have this by definition because of their size, because of their population. And Europe, unfortunately, didn't have these mechanisms, and certification might be actually a catalyst towards this direction. Now, ENISA is following a very inclusive approach. By definition, we are engaging with the stakeholders, we listen carefully, and we do our best, to balance the different views. On technical matters, sometimes, the truth is one. And, of course, when it comes to particular policy choices, strategy, and others, then, of course, we might have to play a little bit with the parameters. But so far, we are very pleased with, contribution, the participation of the stakeholders, their enthusiasm, and so on. We don't have yet experience on rolling out a schema, so we hope to see soon one, rubber stamped and being on the market. And then, of course, ENISA will have certain duties to follow up, like, for example, certain vulnerabilities that will be identified in relation to a schema will be reported, and ENISA will have a way of collecting them, and somehow presenting them, so that the vendors know what are their weaknesses and do their best, to improve. Of course, ENISA also supports, the member states that are developing the capabilities and the schemes. So these national certification authorities. There was a culture of certification in a few member states, but not all member states had this. So we had to build up these schemes, these mechanisms. And in a few countries, this is a very smooth process. In others, it's a learning process that will take some time. And we see that certification becomes very popular in other areas, so sectorial, needs, also horizontal needs. The CRA is a possible, way. In artificial intelligence, there are, particular reference to certification. So we believe that is going to be a very important, development for Europe. And we have always to relate this with the developments of the market, because indeed there is a cost to certification, and indeed, big players have an advantage because they have the financial resources. But we hope that, there will be a way to support also smaller players, to somehow comply with, at least with the principles of some of these schemes, so that, the market is balanced and there is enough innovation. And what we do, actually doesn't affect startups, which is the blood of the European economy.
talking about the market, we're talking for obviously the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, concerns the security of the IoT. And I'll switch back to French, I'm sorry. Hold on, je parle en français.
So when we talk about the security of connected objects, Evangelos was telling us about the market, but that market is for professionals as well as final users, individual people. If we note a better taking into account of the cybersecurity from professionals, what's the case with the end users? How can we make cybersecurity more affordable to individuals so that they become our first line of defense? In a few words, indeed, in the first session, Mr. Berger gave us the recipe but honestly, we need to get down 1 or 2 floors here, because only talking to an audience that is expert in cybersecurity, talking about certification, there are certainly plenty of people who don't understand exactly what it means, what it is to give trust. What's the link between the understanding of the threat, that collective awareness, and the reality of things? Who is responsible and what can we do? So that's a major topic. We need to make the difference first between the Cyber Resilience Act from the Cybersecurity Act. The Cybersecurity Act, I would have preferred to call it Cybersecurity Trust Act, because everything starts from trust. And here it talks about resilience. And both should complement each other in order to give consumers the level of security by default, the means, based on certification and labels, to have a feeling of the security level. With certification, we can have labels that will be put on products. And that's certainly going to be revealing, and that's what we hope, to anybody. Then you have companies that use certain products, and they will have to go further than that in their explanations in order to make the right decisions. Normally, we should be able to give consumers a label, a brand, with the data that you know, so that a certain level of trust is given for individuals to have trust and for us to minimize their ratio of responsibility. Unfortunately, technology is not going to solve our problems of cybersecurity as such, but there will also be responsibility in the hands of our consumers. And it's with that awareness raising that we can create, through different means, be that films or videos. We can be involved in different aspects. We've talked about cartoons that are created for people aged 7 to 77. We have to reach that extreme point in order to involve everybody, producers and so on. Precisely, the security of connected objects is a main concern of Simon Hsu, who is in charge of the security labs of Hewlett-Packard. So let's discuss that topic with him. If you can please join me on stage.
Simon, as I said, you're the global head of security labs at Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard, obviously, a very well-known hardware manufacturing company, but it's not one that springs to mind immediately when we're discussing cybersecurity matters. Printers are connected devices, probably the first connected devices that have entered our homes. So it does make sense. But cybersecurity is actually very central, a very central concern and field of play for HP. I had the chance to talk about it with you. Could you tell us about the place cybersecurity holds for HP and what you do in the field?
Sure. Thanks very much, Adrian. And first of all, I deeply appreciate the translators, and I apologize that I can't deliver this in French, and I hope you can bear with me.
Don't, because as I keep saying, it's the International Cybersecurity Forum, and we're here. Feel free.
But yeah, okay, as you said, so my role, yeah, I'm a researcher, so I think very much about the future, and so where cyber's evolving, and it's evolving very fast, how we pay attention to that evolving world. So I'll come back to that, but to your question about, why HP in this world, actually the panel did a very nice job. Usually I have to explain, we feel very much fellow travelers on this kind of cybersecurity journey with the cybersecurity industry, which is usually focused on how do we detect and recover and have a lot of software mechanisms to do that. But as the panel's pointed out, increasingly we rely on those connected devices, and all those connected devices are not equal things in the way we can run software security over them in order to do the kinds of things we need to do to keep things resilient. So I guess we've learned this most, in the PC industry. For good or bad, that's been one of the most attacked ecosystems and endpoints for many decades. For many decades, so that's where we kind of learnt a lot of the principles about, you need to do secure by design, secure by default, make it work, but also resilient by design. We need the ability we know these devices get attacked, we know they get compromised, we need to have designed in mechanisms to help them recover at source, but also help people who are managing, the professionals managing fleets of devices, get them back and up and going again. So this is something we've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, if you like, in the PC ecosystem. And then we can bring that to bear as we think about printers, 3D printers, so then we're going, other things that enterprises run, but also as we go to the future factory, as the panel were describing, that future of connected devices is much broader, and we need, and I think we welcome the kind of Cyber Resilience Act in that sense of helping us pay attention to what manufacturers need to do more broadly in what we've learned in other places. So,
given the scope and footprint of HP, your experience in managing endpoint devices is massive. What's your take on the situation today, and what does it inform you as to the future threats and challenges that our devices and infrastructures are going to face? What do you imagine they're going to face?
Yeah, there's a few things I'll point to. Still one of the most massive attack vectors is clickbait. I'm always tempted by the wrong click. I download the wrong thing. We can't always protect users from those mistakes, and then you need ways to actually contain, protect, and recover from end-user devices. So we see that quite strong. The panel also spoke about upstream. I guess the phrase I'm more used to hearing is shift left. The attackers have shifted left as we've got better at defending the user interface and the hardware stack, the operating system. They shift left. They go upstream, whether it's SolarWinds, where we're attacking the supply chain of software. We see that as well in hardware. How do we shift left as manufacturers to put better security mechanisms earlier in the life cycle so that we can keep ahead? But the panel spoke to that well. And I think similarly, we also see as we do a good job in the operating system, things go below the operating system. So we see a lot more firmware attacks on the hardware. And now this comes back to not all devices are equal. It's not just a case of being able to put software mechanisms on. It matters what the manufacturers have done to make that device serviceable, securable, and make that security manageable as well. So.
You've managed IoT devices for decades. There's an exponential increase of number of IoT devices, and it's only the beginning. What are the lessons that we can learn from your experiences? What are the main challenges that you expect our networks and the infrastructure will face? And what's your take on the framework? I mean, I guess you mentioned it quite positively, but that the EU is putting in place. How do you see HP operating within that framework?
I think, I guess the easiest one to speak to is the printer example, which was an IoT. It's a computing device with some actuators for printing paper, but it sits on the network. And it's interesting. For a long time, we'd go around to a lot of enterprises who had endpoint device policies, which usually meant their PCs and mobile devices, and they would be patching them and looking after them. But of course, printers are on our endpoint devices as well, and they weren't always paying the same kind of attention. So I think that's one of the reasons we welcome the kind of act. Is like, no, pay attention. These things are on the network. They have the same kind of capabilities, more in some cases, and they're sensitive devices. We need to be paying the same kind of attention that we've always been paying to the kind of end user devices. So we see that with printing and it's happening less, but it still happens. And as we move to, I guess, what you might think of the cyber physical world, the factory world, we see that more in spades, because I think there's more capability, more possibilities of the risks that we see when you start having cyber physical systems where the actuators, they're in a different world from just the cyber realm, and different things can happen, and we're still learning what the risks are there. So paying attention early and doing it in a joined up way absolutely matters. Yeah.
It's cybersecurity has always been at the forefront of software manufacturers, obviously. Less so hardware manufacturers, but this is changing. HP was a trailblazer in a way in that field. Do you keep open dialogue with the industry, with hardware manufacturers? How do you collaborate with these players, with the industry at large, and what direction are you trying to maybe lead the industry, or what are you sharing with them? What direction are you going in, the direction you're going into?
Yeah, and I'll go back that phrase, fellow travelers. I do see us in that way. It is absolutely a team sport, getting security right. You know, we're one part of the ecosystem, a big one, because we're a manufacturer. We put a lot of footprint out of those connected devices, but we rely on our supply chain. We rely on the software vendors. We need to help our software vendors understand the mechanisms we're building into our devices so that they can make the best use of them, so that you can detect early, recover at scale, take advantage of protection that doesn't work, that works, even if you're not detecting or modeling the attacks. These are all things that can be built into the hardware. It has longer life cycles because it's not like DevOps where you can just release a new application. There are life cycles that have to be paid to account, so there's a lot of work that has to go into tying these things together so that when you bring something out, it is usable, and so absolutely that team sport plays, and this is where the encouragement, if you like, of the incentive structures around acts like this absolutely help the different players work together on that. So, yeah.
Well, Simon Shu from HP, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll go back to the panel. Je vais rejoindre mes panélistes.
I'm going back to the panel. Roland, the standard approach, it is limitations to the company, but it also helps the users to make the right choices. We spoke about, isn't this the best way to deal with this issue? You're talking about certification. Yes, of course. Behind certification, there is, as I said, a very important element, which is the trust, which usually relies on the technologies that you can implement to verify and ensure compliance with the specifications that are necessary in the process and services products, but also this aspect of transparency, of visibility, which we see it through the various stakeholders that are accredited, that are recognized, that have access, and that give objective results. And so, in the end, these regulatory body, they will give some kind of commitment. And all this certification should transmit to the end user, to the consumer, to the buyer, the ability to take the right decision. That's why the Cyber Resilience Act has separated in 3 levels: basic, substantial, and high, among others, to be able to answer the needs of the market and, of course, help the consumer take the right decisions, basing himself or herself on these 3 levels. There's really an effort to be made. It's strongly linked to this labelizing, to this brand, this awareness raising, to be able to express properly the elements, the criteria that have been evaluated, that are reflected in the certification, so that the stakeholders, the consumers, can take the proper decision.
How do you think that public and private institutions can collaborate as best as possible or better to improve the resilience of Europe?
Yes. Yes, so this is a key question because we cannot solve cybersecurity only with regulations, and the role of the state should be supportive, and the private sector as well should take ownership and be more accountable for its actions. So there should be a proper public-private cooperation, and the best way to do that is through trust. And there are different examples of this. So we can collaborate at the policy development process. I have given a couple of examples, you know, in the certification area where public and private stakeholders discuss about, you know, the definition of the schemes. We can definitely exchange a lot of views about the threats, about the risks, about what affects the assets of the private sector. We have seen a lot of interesting, you know, capabilities emerging. The state possesses a lot of important capabilities. We all know about, you know, the depth of the capabilities and the interesting, you know, services that ANSI has, you know, and offers, you know, to the French market. So definitely such kind of institutions can help a lot, you know, the private sector. And of course, we should be able, you know, to collaborate with each other during a crisis. So if something goes wrong, you know, then the public and the private sector should, you know, respond quickly. The thing is that there is always this division about the supervisory role of the state. And if we, you know, somehow avoid demonizing this role and stick to the fact that we are all on the same boat and it is our vital interest to collaborate and help each other at different stages, then we shall be able to build up the trust. So, for example, the cyber campus that, you know, is being developed here in Paris, in France, it's, in my opinion, a good way forward. It shows, you know, how public and private sector can collaborate, and through this collaboration, in my opinion, not only with the big players, but also with smaller players, we can see startups emerging, an ecosystem, you know, of players, you know, developing a lot of knowledge and expertise. So NISA is very supportive of all these efforts, and the Commission as well. They have a lot of programs they support through projects, you know, a lot of initiatives like this in the past, and I'm sure in the future. And of course, not to forget also the European Cybersecurity Competence Center, you know, which is a big inspiration, you know, for future research funding in this area that will definitely somehow be a catalyst for public-private cooperation. But I'm sure Lorena can provide more information on this matter.
Well, listen, we have a packed program at the FIC and a lot of content coming up. So, just in a minute, maybe if I can give you the final word, Lorena.
I think it was very interesting. There was lots of agreement among us, including with Hewlett Packard, who's part of the industry. I think we all agree that the cost that the industry is supporting at the moment are not sustainable. These are not just economical costs, sadly. And for an entire ecosystem to be safe, all the parts at the moment, there are many attacks on the supply chain, on the value chain, which means that regardless of you are a responsible company and we take all adequate safety measures, the NIS directive, for instance, the danger can come from any element of the value chain. So it's absolutely necessary that we address all these elements. That clearly there's lacking. We have measures that are taking on the directive. We have legislative measures on the safety of the products that do not touch cybersecurity, or at least not in an adequate manner as it should be in the 21st century. We have a Cybersecurity Act that that raises the issue for certain specific products and that are voluntary. So there's lags here, and we need two gaps. We need to fill these gaps, and of course, the Commission, together with the Parliament, we need to act in a way of supporting, in such a way that we would support competitivity instead of placing hurdles in the way. I think that's what we're hearing too, is that the awareness was there, but now we're seeing a direct orientation into everyone is pulling in the same direction to answer this question. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We are reaching the end of this panel and this plenary sessions. We will have a thematic plenary on the cybersecurity and the companies. We were speaking with Frances again, who is a whistleblower, talking to us from the US, and the explorer Christian Flo, who is also going to be speaking to us. And we'll have the Vice President of the European Commission, Margaret Skinas. And the forum continues with roundtables, conferences, and you'll have it on the app. You can see it on the FIC app. Some of these can be viewed in streaming via the application. And of course, the FIC Agora, and on the slides. All our sessions are available in replay on the YouTube INCYBER YouTube channel. Thanks to our panelists, and an excellent day